to speak to Peter Worthington. He is a chief economist with Absa. Peter, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Perhaps let's take a look at what was said at the time when this became a reality back in May of the year 2000, and it was said that this is being done in a bid to improve trade and investment ties with sub-Saharan Africa on the basis that the best way to raise living standards on the continent and create badly needed jobs was through trade, and so it goes. All these years later, how far have we come in realizing that?
Well, listen, I think the AGOA has been a benefit to a great many African countries that have enjoyed preferential and duty-free access into the U.S. markets because of the AGOA trade regime. But I think for South Africa, the important thing to understand is that most of the products that we export to the U.S., a very large chunk of them enter into the U.S. even in the absence of AGOA, either duty-free or with a very low import tariff. So, for countries that are big textile exporters, textile and clothing exporters, it's a big deal. For South Africa, where more than half of our exports to the U.S. are precious metals and gemstones that enter in pretty much duty-free, AGOA doesn't matter quite as much. So we've come quite a way. Our trade with the U.S. has grown. But still, our exports to the U.S. are only about 8% of our total exports. So I think that gives you a little bit of a picture here. The U.S. isn't our most important export market, and most of our goods...
Oh my, it appears we've lost our connection to Peter Worthington. Peter, are you still with us?
Would enter in sort of zero or very low... I'm still with you, yes.
Okay, please finish your thought. We can hear you now.
Okay, no, I've finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perhaps let's deal with this concept of duty-free. Break it down for our viewers in simple terms. What are we talking about?
Duty-free means that there is no import tariff. So import tariffs are a tax that are imposed by customs and excise authorities in any individual nation against another country's exports. So, for example, when we ship platinum to the U.S., there's no tariff. When we ship cars to the U.S., under AGOA, there's no tariff. But if we lost AGOA, there would be a 2.5% import tax.
Sure. Okay. You released a report called the Insight Macroeconomic Report this week, and you argue that even if South Africa were to be expelled, that risk is really minimal. But if we were to lose our privileges, exports to the United States already have a zero or nominal duty under the most favored nation regime under the World Trade Organization. Help us understand that relationship too.
Right. So there isn't one tariff for all goods. There's a range of different tariffs under the most favored nation regime, which is the broadest regime offered by the U.S. And then some of those tariffs are cut or reduced to zero under AGOA. So when you actually look at it, under the most favored nation regime, we have a kind of an average tariff for our exports into the U.S. In other words, the average tax that the U.S. authorities impose on our exports to them under the most favored nation regime comes out at around 1.1%. It's pretty low. Under AGOA, it's close to zero. But I think we can see that even if we lost that privilege, 1.1%, it isn't huge. And so I don't think expulsion from AGOA and loss of those preferences would be a sort of a catastrophe for South African exporters. That said, sort of expulsion from AGOA could have a bigger impact on sentiment because it would be a sign that the U.S. And its business people there are viewing South Africa with sort of a little bit more circumspection. And that could really dampen sentiment and hence investment going forward. So I think there could be this sentiment impact from AGOA expulsion. If it were to happen, which we think is not very likely, to be honest. It's pretty clear that the U.S. would like to keep South Africa on its side. But AGOA itself is not decided purely by the executive in states. Congress have a big say when the whole program comes up for renewal in 2025. And there are segments of the U.S. Congress on both parties who have not taken very favorably South Africa's stance in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
So essentially, Peter, perceptions game here as well. Unfortunately, that's all the time we can afford this afternoon. Peter Worthington is the chief economist with Absa. Thank you very much for your time.